We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Tesam at Aleph and Meseches Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 39a. The Gemara here is continuing Abaya's answer to explain the Mishnah. Abaya explains the Mishnah that in the first case of the Mishnah where the Shomeres Yavam has the rights to the property, so in that case the property came to her when she was a widow after her first husband died while she is a Shomeres Yavam. However, in the second case of the Mishnah where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue about whether she has the rights to the property, so in that particular case the case is where the property came to her while she was married to the first husband, and that's why Beis Shammai over there say that she may not have the full rights to that property. And the Gemara now continues, V'kasavar Abaya, and Abaya holds Yodo ki Yoda, that his hand is the same as her hand. And Rashi over here explains, V'kasavar Abaya Yodo ki Yoda, Abaya holds that his hand is like her hand, means as follows. Midu'ugi pluksayu benoflu lo kashi tachta, from the fact that Abaya is understanding that the machlokas between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is when she got the property while she was married to the first husband. V'afilu hachi leBeis Hillel, nevertheless, according to Beis Hillel, nechasim bechezkasim, the property stays in their chazaka, meaning it's possible that she still has control over that property. So kasavar Abaya, so you see that Abaya holds nisua yado ki yada, that by someone who's married, a woman who's married, so his hand and her hand are equal. They have equal rights over the property. Velo yoser, but he doesn't have more rights than her. Hilkach, therefore, kishames, when he dies, ve'ein liyavam ba'el zeka, and now the yavam, she's only a shomeres yavam, and therefore all the yavam has is the zeka bond between them. So actually, yado gariya miyada, so his hand actually becomes less than hers. She ends up with more rights over the property. Unechasim bechezkas, and that's why the property is in her chazaka. Beis Shammai pligi, and Beis Shammai will argue with Beis Hillel, and then they'll hold, ve'amri, they'll say, nesua, when it comes to a married woman, yado adifa miyada, her husband's hand is actually more powerful than hers. He has more control over her property. Ucheshames, and so when he dies, yad hayavam ki yada, so the hand of the yavam is going to be equal to hers, v'yachloku, and that's why Beis Shammai say in the Seifa that they divide the property. And Rashi continues and adds, uv'chsubis b'hakosev, and ksubis also nami pligi Abaya v'Rav, it's the same machlokus over there between Abaya and Rav, dekamar Abaya yado ki yada, because Abaya says his hand is equal to her hand, v'Rav amar yado adifa miyada, and Rav says his hand is more than her hand, v'amrin and hasam nafkamina l'shomeres yavam, and the Gemara says over there as well that the nafkamina is by, like our case, of a shomeres yavam. And the Gemara continues along the lines of what Rashi just said, Amar le Rava, so Rava says to Abaya, idanafli lo kashi tachtav the Baal, if the case was where the property came to her while she was married to the first husband, the kuli alma lo pligi diyado adifa miyada, everybody would agree that his hand is greater than her hand. As Rashi over here says, the yado adifa miyada v'afilo Beis Hillel modu, even Beis Hillel would admit the shakli yorshe habal ben achasim, that the inheritors of the Baal, they could have rights in the property. And rather, Rava says, Elo idi v'idi denaflu lo kashish omeres yavam. Rather, both the Reisha and the Seif of the Mishnah, it's talking about when the property came to her while she was a shomeres yavam, while she had this bond to the yavam. Reisha de lo avid b'maimer. The difference between the Reisha and the Seifa is that in the Reisha, he didn't perform a maimer. Again, maimer is that first step in the yibum process. He didn't do that. Seifa de avid b'maimer. But in the Seifa, he actually did do a maimer. So therefore, of course, again, in the Seifa, he's going to have more rights to the property because he started the process with a maimer. The kasava Rav, and Rav holds maimer leBeis Shammai osa vaday arusa. By a maimer, according to Beis Shammai, that creates a situation of a vaday arusa. It's the status of a vaday arusa. V'safik nesuin, and it's considered a safik in terms of nesuin. Vaday arusa lidchos b'tzara. Vaday arusa makes an nafkamina in terms of pushing off the co-wife. V'safik nesua lachluk b'nechasim, and she has the status of a safik nesua in terms of dividing up the property. And Rashi over here explains that lo idi v'idi denaflu lo kashish omeres yavam. In both cases, the Reisha and the Seif of the Mishnah, the property comes to her when she's a shomeres yavam. Reisha de lo avid b'maimer, and the Reisha, he doesn't do a maimer. Kodem shenaflu lo hanechasim, meaning before the nechasim came to her, he didn't do a maimer. Hilkach zeka lo mahanya v'lo midi b'nechasim. Therefore, the zeka he has with her does nothing in terms of the property. V'seifa David b'maimer, but in the Seifa there was a maimer. Ubeis Shammai l'taymayu, and Beis Shammai will follow according to their reasoning. The Amri maimer kani b'perakar boachin, they say that maimer is kona. In perakar boachin, they said that earlier. Beis Shammai omrim ishtoima v'chulo, Beis Hillel taymayu the Amri lo kani. Beis Hillel will be according to their reasoning that they say it's not kona, so that's why Beis Shammai say that he's going to have rights in the property, meaning the yavam, and Beis Hillel will say no, everything will stay with their chazaka. And then Rashi continues, V'kasava Rava, and Rava holds, Kinyan Maimer leBeis Shammai kani kevadai arusa uchesafik nesua. That a Maimer, according to Beis Shammai, will be considered a vadai arusa, meaning at that level of an arusa vadai, and at the level of a nesua misafik. Kolomar, what it means to say is as follows. Avagav de Beis Shammai vadai arusa mashvi lo lidchos bitzaras achosa mishum achosisha. Even though Beis Shammai holds that when the Maimer is performed, so that's considered a vadai arusa in terms of the tzara, meaning let's say you have a situation of a co-wife of her sister, that's going to be pushed off because of achosisha. Kidekatani ishto imo, like it says the case that we mentioned just before, that his wife is with him. Miu lo kevadai nesua mashvila. Nevertheless, it's not going to be considered like a vadai nesua. It's only going to be considered like a vadai arusa. Lemikni yavam kula yerusha dila. If it would be a vadai nesua, so then the yavam would get the entire yerusha, her entire yerusha. Alakasafik nesua v'yachlok. Or rather, it's only going to be at the level of a safik nesua, and that's why Beis Shammai say that they have to divide the property. And what Rashi is referring to when he says that according to Beis Shammai, she's a vadai arusa in order to push off the tzaras achosa mishum achosisha. And also Rashi referred to that earlier, that's the Mishnah on Chav Tes Amud Aleph, that Beis Shammai omrim ishto imo. The case over there is that the person does a mimer with the woman, and then the sister of the woman falls to him for a yibum. So we say that again, according to Beis Shammai, it's considered like he's already betrothed to the first woman, and it's already a marriage, that's ishto imo, and therefore the sister is completely pushed off in terms of chalitza and yibum because it's an issue of achosisha. That's what Rashi is referring to. So again, that's the idea that she's considered to be like a vadai arusa, to push off the co-wife, to push off the sister, but she's not considered like a vadai nesua, only like a safek nesua. And the Gemara continues, Itmar mishmei de Rebbe Lazar kivasei de Rava. It was taught in the name of Rebbe Lazar that he explained the Mishnah the way Rava explained the Mishnah. V'itmar mishmei de Rebbe Yossi Rebbe Chanina kivasei de Abai. And it was said in the name of Rebbe Yossi Rebbe Chanina that he explained the Mishnah the way Abai explained the Mishnah. Again, Abai explained the Mishnah earlier that the Seifa of the Mishnah is talking about when she inherited the property while she was still married to the first husband. And the Gemara continues, Umiyamar Rebbe Lazar hachi, but does Rebbe Lazar really say this? V'yamar Rebbe Lazar, but Rebbe Lazar said, Maimer leBeis Shammai eino kona, ela lidchos b'tzara b'lvad, that Maimer according to Beis Shammai is not kona, except to push off the tzara, like Rashi explained earlier, that the Maimer is effective, that if the sister falls to him as a co-wife, then she's pushed off, and there's no chalitza, there's no yibam when it comes to the sister. But apparently Maimer according to Beis Shammai within Rebbe Lazar's shita is not kona, in order to give the husband any rights, or the yavam any rights in terms of the property. So first the Gemara answers Epoch, just reverse it, that it's not that Rebbe Lazar goes like Rava, rather Rebbe Lazar is the one that goes like Abaya. V'bai Seiman, if you want, I could say another answer. Liolam lo sepach. You don't have to reverse it. Amar lach Rebbe Lazar. Rebbe Lazar will say to you, Ki amri ano. What did I mean when I said that according to Beis Shammai, Maimer is not kona? The lo sagi lo beget. I meant that it's not kona, that it's not enough just to give her a get. It's not as if they're already married to the extent that all you need is a get. Elo deboy nami chalitza. But rather, you're also going to still require chalitza. But lachlok ben chasim de lo kani mi amri. But did I ever say that in terms of dividing up the property that it's not a kinyan for that? I never mentioned that. That's not what I was saying. In other words, it could be that Rebbe Lazar will hold, according to Beis Shammai, Maimer will be enough of a kinyan in terms of the property, in terms of giving the yavam rights to that property. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rapapa says, Diyuka de masnisin kivase de Abaya. The language of the Mishnah supports Abaya's position. Rashi over here says, Kivase de Abaya, to seifa b'denaflu lo k'shitachas abal. In other words, the seif of the Mishnah, talking about the case where she died and what happens to the property. So Abaya said that was talking about when she got the property while she was still married to the first husband. So the language of the Mishnah supports that. V'avagav de kasha mesa. Now, even though it's still difficult, according to the position of Abaya, why is the Mishnah dealing with a case where she died? The Mishnah could have been dealing equally with a case where she was alive. Rashi over here says, de kasha mesa l'kamon mefarish. Gemara is going to explain in a moment what that means, what the kasha of mesa is. And now Rapapa says what the diuk from the Mishnah is. To katani, because the Mishnah teaches nechasim hanichnasim v'yotzim ima. It says that we're talking about property that enters the marriage and leaves the marriage with her. So my nichnasin my yotzin. What does it mean it entered the marriage? What does it mean it's leaving the marriage? Lav nichnasin l'rishus habal. Doesn't it mean that it enters into the rishus of the husband? Meaning when she brings it into the marriage, it's now in the rishus of her husband. V'yotzim rishus habal rishus av, and then that property leaves the rishus of the husband and goes to the rishus of the father. As Rashi over here says, v'yotzin rishus habal kishamesa, meaning when she dies, it leaves the rishus habal and goes into the other rishus. Alma denaflu la tachas bala. The point is over here that you see that the property came to her while she was with her husband. In other words, the Gemara is making a diak in the Mishnah because the Mishnah means to say it's nichnosin li rishus habal. It enters to the rishus of the husband. While the husband is alive, she gets this property. It's now in his rishus. And then again, it's yotze me rishus habal or rishus av. That's after she dies. V'afa gav the kasha mason. The Gemara continues. Now, even though it's difficult, why does the Mishnah bother with the case where she's died? And the question is, what do you need to do with the property? As the Gemara explains, why have a machlokus Beisham and Beishil in the Mishnah about the property itself? Let's say it was land. So the property itself, after she dies, where does that go? Why argue about that? You might as well just argue while she's still alive. What happens with the peiros? What happens with the fruits? V'sulo media, and nothing further is needed. Rashi over here says, why argue about the land itself after she dies? Just argue while she's alive. What happens with the peiros? Because the whole question over here is whether his hand is like her hand. In other words, her husband already has died. Now she's in a situation of potential yibum over here. So you have the same question on the peiros while she's alive. V'sulo midi. You don't need to discuss anything more. Ein lahashav al kach. Rashi says what that means is we don't need to respond to this. Because it's certainly true. The words of the Mishnah imply what Abai is saying, that the property came to her while she was married to the first husband. But also we have a question, because why does the Mishnah have to talk about a case where she died, and we're talking about what happens to the property itself? You can talk about a case where she's alive, and then there's a question, what happens regarding the peiros? And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Kenasa harehi v'chulu." It said that if the Yavam marries the woman, the widow, so then it's like she's his wife for all purposes. So the Gemara says, "Lamai hilchasa." What practical halachic nafkamina does this make? Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina says, "Lomer" means to say shemegarsha beget. It means to say that if he would want to divorce her, he does it with a get. It's not an issue of chalitza anymore. Umachzir, and also he can remarry her if he wants to after he divorces her. Gemara says, Megarsha beget pshita. The fact that he divorced her with a get, isn't that obvious? She's his wife. Why wouldn't he divorce with a get? So the Gemara says, no. Kasal kadai techamina. I might have thought it says he takes her as a wife, and then it still uses this language of yibum. V'yibma amarachmana. The pasuk says v'yibma at the end. V'yadayin yivume harishon alem. Maybe the original yibum is still upon her. She still has the status of a yivama. And b'chalitza in beget lo. Maybe you should use chalitza, not a get. So kamash malon. So that's what the Mishnah is teaching us. No, she's considered like a regular wife, and you just use a get. The Gemara says machzira, so then he can remarry her, let's say divorce her. Pshita, that also seems obvious. So the Gemara says, no, salkadai techamina, because I might have thought mitzvah deramya rachmono le'avda. He did the mitzvah which was upon him. In other words, he did the yibam. Hashta take him aleh b'isrei shasach. Now she should revert back to the isser of the wife of the brother, and he shouldn't be allowed to marry her anymore at this point once he divorces her, because she was the wife of his brother. So Kamash Malana comes to tell us, no, once he does the mitzvah of yibam, there's no longer the prohibition of eshasach. Gemara says, why don't we say indeed this is the case, that there is a prohibition of eshasach? The Gemara says, Amar Kra, no, the pasuk says, he takes her to him for a wife. Once she's taken as a wife, she's treated like a regular wife in all respects. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. It says that she's his wife in all respects when she marries the Yavam, except that her ksuba is still paid from the property of her first husband. There's no ksuba from the second husband. So the Gemara says, my time, and what's the reason? Isha hiknu lo min hashamayim, because this wife was given to him from the heavens. He didn't choose to marry her. As Rashi over here says, Isha hiknu lo liyavam min hashamayim v'lo shi ben nechasav l'ksubasa. He never designated his property, put a lien on his property towards her ksuba. V'yachol l'mochern b'chol shayir. So he's able to sell the property anytime he wants. There's no lien. She has no lien on his property in terms of the ksuba. But the Gemara continues, v'lesla min harishon. Let's say there is no property from the first husband. She can't collect anything from her ksuba. As Rashi over here says, v'lesla me rishon de lesla nechasim. If he has no property and there's nothing to collect from the rishon, from the first husband in terms of the ksuba, takinu la misheni. So then they instituted that yes, the second husband does need to give her a ksuba contract. Kedei shelo teikala be'inav lotzia. That way it won't be easy in his eyes to divorce her. In other words, if he knows that he's going to have to pay a ksuba to her from his own property if he divorces her, so that makes it more difficult for him to divorce her. So again, if there's no property from the first brother that can be designated designated that's used for her ksuba, so then there is going to be a ksuba from the second brother, from her second husband. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, mitzvah begadol liyavim. The mitzvah is that for the oldest brother, he's the one that's supposed to do the yibam. Lo ratz, if he doesn't want to, mahalchin al kol achin, then we go to all of the brothers. Lo ratz, if they don't want to, chozer neitz al gadol, then we go back to the oldest brother. The omrim lo, we say to him, alecha mitzvah, upon you is the mitzvah, o chalotz o yibam. Either you should do chalitza or you should do the yibam. And the Mishnah continues, tala bekatan, let's say this brother makes his decision dependent on one of the brothers who is a minor, yagdil, meaning wait until that brother gets older and see what he does. O begadol, or maybe there's the older brother, yavam mimidinas hayam, until he comes from far away. O cheresh o shota, let's say he makes his decision dependent on a cheresh, somebody who's deaf, or shota, somebody who's an imbecile, again on the hopes that they become better and they're able to do the yibam. Ein shomin lo. In all those cases, we don't listen to him. We don't wait for these things to happen. Ela omrim lo. Rather, we say to him, alecha mitzvah, upon you is the mitzvah. O chalotz, o yibam, either do chalitza or you should do yibam. Rashi over here says, Tala bekatan katan mamish. He says, I want to wait for this katan to get older. Uvegadol shayagadol achim b'medinas hayam. Let's say the oldest brother is far away. V'yesh lo ach kan hagadol min ha'achim shelefanenu. And there's a brother here who is the oldest of among the brothers here. V'tala gadol ha'achim shelefanenu bo lomar hamtino lo shugadol mimeni shemayivim osach. So then he says, okay, let's just wait for the real oldest brother to come back. Maybe he'll do yivim. Let's just wait around. V'hachi mukach begemara. This explanation is proven in the Gemara. Da'amrinan tashma. The Gemara talks about the fact that if you really think that the oldest is better, so why don't we listen to him? Nintar, maybe we should wait. Point Rashi says, as you see from the Gemara, that the brother who's far away is actually the oldest. So he's waiting for an even older brother. He's not allowed to do that. Rather, we say, Alecha mitzvah, the mitzvah is on you. Even though your brother that's far away is older than you, since you are the oldest of the brothers who are present, alecha mitzvah, the mitzvah is on you. Deshuye mitzvah lo mashina. We don't delay this kind of mitzvah. And this is what is explained in the Gemara. And the Gemara says, Itmar, we have the following machlokas amoroim and bias katan v'chalitzas gadol. Let's say you have a choice of doing the yibum with a younger brother or chalitza with an older brother. So which one is preferable? Pligi bar Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. This is a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Chad Omar bias katan adifa. One says the bias katan is better. The Chad Omar chalitzas gadol adifa, and the other one says the chalitza of the gadol is better. And Rashi over here says, Bias katan v'chalitzas gadol. Gadol rotza lachlotz means the older brother wants to do chalitza. V'katan mimenu rotza liyavim. A younger brother wants to do yibam. V'ai katan lav katan mamishu. Rashi says, we're not talking about a katan that's really a minor. The katan lav bar chalitza v'yibam. A katan can't do chalitza and yibam. Shema yimtza saris, because it might turn out that he's a saris, he can't have kids. V'afilu mandalo chayish l'miyat, even according to the one who isn't usually concerned about something that's such a small chance. The katan muter liyavim, and a katan is allowed to do yibam according to that opinion. Hachavadai sugya and mucha, but here it's clear from the sugya, the lav katan mamishu, we're not talking about a real katan. Mida kaparach lekamon tola bekatan at sheyagdil v'shani leishuya mitzvah lo mashinan. Because later on we're going to talk about tola bekatan at sheyagdil, that case, and we're going to talk about the delaying of a mitzvah we don't delay. Alma bekatan mamish kulu modu. You see that when it comes to a katan mamish, everybody agrees that you're not going to do it with a katan mamish because you don't want to delay the mitzvah. And the Gemara continues, man do amar bias katan adifa. The one that says the bias katan, meaning doing the yibam with the younger brother is better. Dam mitzvah be yibam, because the real mitzvah is to do yibam. Uman damar chalitzas gadol adifa. The one who says it's better to do chalitza with the older brother. B'makam gadol bias katan lav klumi, because if you have an older brother, so using the younger brother, that's nothing. And the Gemara says, Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah, Lo Ratza Machzir Al Kol Achin. It says that if the older brother doesn't want to do it, so then we go to all the other brothers. My love, is it not? Lo Ratza Liyavim El Alachlotz is exactly this case. He doesn't want to do even, but he wants to do Chalitza. V'katani Mahalchen Eitzel Achin, and yet we say we go to the other brothers first. Shma Mina Bias Katan Adifa. Don't you see from here that the Bias Katan, the Yibum being done with the younger brother, is better than the Chalitza? And so the Gemara says, Lo, no, that's not what the Mishnah means. Lo ratza lachlotz v'lo liyavim. He doesn't want to do anything. The older brother doesn't want to do chalitza. He doesn't want to do yibam, and that's when we go to the other brothers. So the Gemara says, Dechevasa gabe ha'achin. But if that's the case, so then it's similar by the other brothers. Lo ratzu lo lachlotz v'lo liyavim. It says they also don't want to do chalitza and they don't want to do yibam. So amai chozer meitzal agadol. But if that's the case, why would we then go back to the older brother? And Rashi over here explains, again, if everybody, the older brother didn't want to do Yibam and Chalitza, and the younger brothers don't want to do Yibam and Chalitza, why would we then go back to the older brother? Now, if you said that they didn't want, anytime it says someone didn't want to do it, it just means they didn't want to do Yibam. That's why we would want to go back to the Gadol when the younger brothers refuse Yibam. Since everybody's saying they would do Chalitza, but nobody's doing Yibam, he also is willing to do chalitza. He's first. In other words, you went to the older brother, he didn't want to do yibam. You went to the younger brothers, they didn't want to do yibam. Now you go back to the older brother for chalitza. That all makes sense. But if the chalitza also was something that nobody wanted to do, so what do we have to go back to the gadol for? It's obvious, Rashi says, that it's to force him to do chalitza. But if we're already forcing, you might as well force them to do it. Why are we bothering Bezin so much to keep going back to other brothers in order to do chalitza? And that's what the Gemara says, lemichvia. The Gemara says, okay, we're going back to the older brother who refused Yibam and chalitza in order to force him. So the Gemara says, lichvia lididhu, just force them. If you're already forcing, like Rashi said, why do we have to have a bother? Why do we have to bother Bezin to go back to the older brother? And so to that, the Gemara says, no, kevan the mitzvah ledidei ramyo ledidei kaifinon. Since really the primary mitzvah is upon the older brother, we would force him rather than the other brothers, and so therefore the Mishnah can really make sense either way. It could be that they refused both Yibam and Chalitza. The older brother first refused that, and then the younger brothers, and then they go back to the older brother to force him to do Chalitza. The Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Tala b'kotanat sheyagdil. Let's say one of the older brothers says, let's wait for this minor brother to grow up and let him do the Yibam. Ein shomin lo, so we don't listen to him. So the Gemara says, V'bias kotan adifam. What are you talking about? Again, if the Yibam is preferable with a kotan, with a younger brother, so amay ein shomin lo, why don't we listen to the older brother? Let's wait for this minor to get a little bit older instead of doing chalitza. Nintar dil magadlo miyavim. Let's wait. Maybe he'll get older and he will do yibam. And so the Gemara says, 1 second, but according to your reasoning, it also said in the Mishnah that if the guy says, let's wait for my older brother to get back from far away, we also don't listen to him. Amai, why don't we listen to him? Nintar dil ma'asi umiyavim. And the Mesoras Hashas changes it from v'choletz to miyavim. Why don't we wait and see, again, if the older brother comes back and he's going to do yibam? So obviously the answer is, alakol shehu mitzvah lo mashinan. Obviously we don't want to delay the mitzvah at all, and therefore that's the real reason why, again, it could be bias katan is adifa, but if you have an actual minor that you have to wait for him to grow up, that we're not going to do. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Tes Amud Beis.